Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session on Thursday, the last day of the conference here. And the first session is from the First Nation Market Housing Fund. We have Travis and Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. There we go. All right, Sego, Sewaguego. Deyolongyate, Niwagaznodo, Kosasne, Dewa Kadegenyo, Wagatsanoni, Kanto, Nua. So my name is Deyon Hyate, Travis Seymour. I'm the CEO of the First Nation Market Housing Fund. I'm happy to be here today. I'm from Akwesasne, so that's basically what I said. And today I'm going to introduce you to the fund. If you're not familiar, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what the Market Housing Fund is all about. And following that, Stephen Fay is going to talk about this research project that we did over the last year, interviewing different bankers and lenders about their work that they do with the Market Housing Fund. One of the things we're trying to do is how can we make the services of the fund better or more effective. So Stephen Fay brings a lot of experience as a consultant and did a great job in this project. So he's going to present some of his findings. So to get things going, I'll just talk a little bit about the Market Housing Fund and who we are. I was here last year. It's my second conference. But at the Market Housing Fund, we also had Earl Commanda. I don't know if you remember Earl Commanda, but this was one of his favorite conferences to come to every year. And he went in his office. He had all those pictures, the big group photo. His office is covered in those photos. So he really likes this event. So I'm glad that we're going to continue that tradition. And Earl now sits on our board of trustees. We have 9 Indigenous trustees from across Canada, representation from the East Coast to the West Coast, Ontario, Quebec. So it really is an Indigenous-led organization. We were established in 2008. We're a trust. We're not a lender. We don't actually lend money for housing. What we do is we have a trust that we take the earnings from that and we use it to support on-reserve housing programs, on-reserve housing loan programs. And up to this point, we've worked with about 41 First Nations across Canada. A year ago, or actually this year, I was selected as the new CEO, and my goal is to increase that. I want to be working with a lot more than 41% of the First Nations in Canada. So our mission is basically to provide a pathway to home ownership for First Nation people. And that's a very complicated process. As you're aware, on First Nations, it's difficult to get a traditional housing loan if you want to pay for it yourself. It's not social housing, it's home ownership. And in many cases, the First Nation has to provide a guarantee for that housing loan. So it's setting up those arrangements that can be very difficult and to do sometimes. But that's what our goal is, to find a way to make a home ownership program work in a First Nation community. And our vision statement has changed this year. So now our vision statement is that First Nation prosperity through home ownership. So the idea is that we should be trying to get as many people in a home ownership situation as possible, because once that basic need of shelter and housing is taken care of, then the family can prosper. They can focus on other things. And so that is a key need in First Nation communities is housing. But if we have more home ownership, it opens the door to a lot of prosperity. The Market Housing Fund, when it was set up in 2008, basically offered just 2 services, and that's the way we are right now. We fall under this government indenture of trust, which says we can only offer this capacity development and credit enhancement program. What we're trying to do this year, as far as changes go, is to change that indenture of trust and to do the transfer of care and control of the organization, really to all First Nation control. And when we're allowed to do that, we will change this and add many more products and services that will allow people to get to home ownership. But for now, these are our main products and services. The capacity development program, which is what we're most well known for. We've been around since 2008, 15 years. A lot of First Nation we work with, we've helped pay for their housing policies, home ownership policies, lot surveys, just training their housing staff how to run a home ownership program, setting up the legal documents to make those arrangements. So those are the types of capacity development projects we funded. Typically, what we're doing is we're trying to fill in the gaps, because what we've heard from our First Nation clients is that they get funding for a housing project, and when it's time to actually get going with it, they realize that there's gaps and there's things that they need, additional things. So the Market Housing Fund has been able to respond to those communities and kind of help fill in some of those gaps. The credit enhancement program is the second thing that we provide, and what that is a suite of legal documents that are set up to help a First Nation run a home ownership program. So how do you define the criteria of people that are going to be approved for the guarantee from the First Nation? How do you adjudicate and decide who's going to get selected? So we provide all of those documents. What's your relationship going to look like with the lender, the legal agreement with them, and actually bringing all the parties together. So if you've ever purchased a house off reserve, you'll notice that there's a lot of professionals that help you pull that housing purchase together. And on the First Nation, you don't have those. So you don't have brokers and realtors and people with legal experience. The Market Housing Fund tries to fill that gap, and we try to hire those people that will assist and get the program going. So at this point, the credit enhancement program, what that is we provide a guarantee backstop against the First Nation guarantee. And that's pretty complicated, hard to explain in a minute or two, but that's basically, it's a guarantee on a guarantee. And up to this point, we've provided about up to $1 billion of credit enhancement guarantee backstop for those 41% of all the First Nations. So our mandate, the fund, is to facilitate, to fill in the gaps, to get market-based home ownership happening. The second part, create the capacity in the community to support it, and then also promote home ownership to get more people aware that that's one of the options they can think about or work towards is being homeowners, and to kind of make that one of the types of housing that a First Nation provides. It's not just social housing, it's rent to own, and then it's home ownership. So that's what we're trying to move more First Nations in that direction. So a lot of changes at the fund are happening. This year, when I took over as the CEO, is I want to take a look at our relationship with lenders. And I was lucky to have Stephen Fay came to our open house. We opened our new head office in Akwesasne. He kind of crashed our open house, but it was good. I knew who Stephen Fay was because he's been our banker in Akwesasne for a long time. But I wasn't aware he was retired and he was open to doing these types of projects. So it was a good connection, and that's how this thing came about. Our organization, we do work with clients right across Canada. So this map kind of shows you we're working with about 67 First Nations in Ontario. And a lot in BC as well, even in the north on the East Coast, we've got a lot of clients. The benefit of this is that we're able to pull some of the best ideas from across Canada, different ways of doing things. And so we were kind of like a repository of all these like sample policies, procedures, and how things get done in home ownership. So with that, I want to start talking about Stephen Fay. So Stephen, when we're putting this together, he sent me his picture, and it was this really fuzzy picture. And then I said, Google him. I said, oh, you know what? Like your picture's in the Globe and Mail. I guess that's when you made it, right? So when your picture's in the Globe and Mail and they make a cartoon of your photo. Yeah. So yeah. So Stephen has started his career with Bank of Montreal in 1980, and he gained a lot of experience through various roles, branch manager, commercial account manager. But as a commercial account manager, he was accountable for managing the bank's relationship with one of Canada's largest First Nation communities. In 1998, Stephen assumed the role of commercial banking area manager and was accountable for a large team of account managers, including those working with First Nations. From December 2000 until he retired in 2021, Stephen Fay was a senior leader of Indigenous banking with BMO Financial Group, including head of Indigenous banking with Ron Jameson, who retired in 2006. I don't know if anyone here remembers Ron Jameson, but he's one of the leaders in the banking field, one of the first vice presidents, very senior person, and he was from Six Nations, or he is from Six Nations. So Stephen Fay was accountable for developing long-term strategic recommendations that allowed BMO to pursue opportunities in the Indigenous market. He served as a leader externally, advocating and representing BMO Financial Group, developing and building relationships with leaders and associations at the national level, and leading the development and positioning of holistic financial solutions. And while leading Indigenous banking, Stephen was instrumental in establishing the first on-reserve housing loan program in Western Canada, and for negotiating BMO's participation in the First Nation Market Housing Fund established by the First Nation government in 2008. He contributed to several other industry firsts, some of the most notable being his involvement in arranging financial support for the first Indigenous-owned dialysis and MRI clinics in Canada. Since retiring, he established his own firm called Indigenous Strategy and Tactical Services, and is a senior advisor with the company. Over the past 12 months, he's been working with us at the Market Housing Fund. He's also assisting First Nation businesses involved in telecommunication and energy. He's a graduate of Wilfrid Laurier University, and with a degree in economics and political science. He was a member of AFOA Canada. He also served as a full term of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business Board of Directors. His areas of expertise, communications, policy writing, a signing officer for commercial loan adjudication for Indigenous borrowers, leadership of high performance teams, and collaboration with industry and government. And please join me in welcoming Stephen Fay.
Thank you, Travis.
Yeah.
Haven't been at a conference for a while, but really happy to be working with the fund, and it's great to do something after you retire. I worked with the First Nation Market Housing Fund for many years, right from the very beginning. In fact, even before it was announced, we worked with the fund to establish common credit parameters to ensure that we were going to be thinking the same way when we talk to a First Nation about home ownership and doing lending to individuals who might want to get a mortgage-like loan. And when I say mortgage-like loan, it really is like a mortgage. The product that we have and that are set up at other banks as well are set up based on the conventional mortgage pricing, based on 25-year amortizations. The debt service calculations are the same, except we do a top up in recognition of those that are exempt from paying taxes to make sure that they're treated fairly. So it really is a program that kind of levels the playing field, but it doesn't really do that if you don't have all the participants. And one of the things we've been working on for the last year is how the heck are we going to get the other banks more involved? I should change this thing here. Oh, wrong way. How are we going to get the other banks involved to improve things? Everything can be improved. And so we went and talked to them all about, hey, how did it go back in 2007 and 2008? You guys didn't sign up. How come you didn't? And some of them didn't have an answer because, gee, that was a long time ago. There's been turnover and everything else. But then we also looked at, hey, how come you're not participating today? So we developed a whole bunch of questions to gauge that, to give us a source of references to, how can we get this working better? So you'll see a number of banks and trust companies on here. That's a very, very small sampling of the list of the banks we talked to. We talked to, I don't know, at least a dozen, maybe more. And again, the purpose was to gather feedback from pre-existing questions, to ask for suggestions that would help us enhance what we're doing to ultimately get more people into houses. So the thrust of the First Nation Market Housing Fund is home ownership. It's only one component of solving the shortage of housing that it exists today and has existed for a long time. So our methodology was pretty straightforward. Let's make sure we develop questions that are meaningful to the banks and will give us the information we need to make changes down the road and to understand what's going on. So as I said earlier, the list of questions was developed for both those actively involved, as well as those that are maybe thinking about it, as well as those who not even thinking about it. How can we get them to think about on-reserve lending, specifically around housing? So that as I said, we looked all the way back and we rephrased our questions to the present, and really it's the present answers that we're really working with right now going forward. So this is a pretty important question. We first posed a question around overall Indigenous strategy. And the reason that's important is because housing unto itself, I'll be honest with you, there's not a huge volume and it may not be profitable. And I know profit, hey, it's a bank. They're going to try and make money, which is okay. But you have to look at it in terms of the overall strategy. Is this part of a broader strategy? If it's not going to really work that well. So we asked questions around the strategy and we got a heck of a lot of diverse answers, from broad and sophisticated to absolutely nothing, with others, a very few others, having a clearly defined strategy. It kind of felt like, and I worked for the bank for 41 years, so I know how it goes. It felt like the top of the house will say, yeah, we want to do more business here, a lot of this going on, and yet the strategic planks that would enable bankers at the local level to do the job, to lend money to individuals, it's not there. It wasn't translating. With the exception of a few FIs, you saw some of the names up there, the strategy was not clearly defined, although we sensed a desire. Everybody was saying, and hopefully more than lip service, saying that they want to do more. So that was encouraging when we were asking these questions. So we dug a little deeper and we asked questions about their belief in the growth potential of the Indigenous market. And this is a multi-pronged question. There was actually several questions. I kind of lumped them together because otherwise we'd be here all day. But we asked them about their belief in the growth potential of the market overall. We asked them about their training and systems in place to deliver. Do you have all that stuff? Again, very diverse answers were provided, from sophisticated beliefs, processes evident at some banks, to in-building mode at others, to uncertainty in how we're going to answer this question, to ad hoc, to very regional approaches, or virtually non-existent at very many of the banks we were talking to. And in some ways, this might be positive for the fund because we got a blank sheet of paper. We can provide guidance to the banks that aren't involved, that might want to get involved, to help them get it right, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, about how we're going to help them get it right. So in the absence of broadly based experience, policies, and training, the fund may have to really look at being flexible and not use a cookie cutter approach when we're dealing with the banks, because everybody's a little bit different, just like every First Nation's different. Cookie cutter doesn't work. So we're going to have to take a bit of a, part of it's going to be common and part of it's going to be flexible, and we just have to know the difference and make sure we can maneuver that. So we went on further and we asked questions about a bank's general involvement in housing. You know, if, are they doing on-reserve lending for people that want to borrow money to build, buy, or renovate a home? Are they even doing Section 10 and Section 95 loans? Have they done any unsecured lending? Have they helped people do renovations up to, say, 10 or 15,000? Do they always need a guarantee? Do bank policies exist? Not housing policies. I'm talking inside the bank policies exist around getting this job done. So on the question of, does the bank see home ownership as part of a housing solution? Universally, the answer was yes. But the conviction I sensed was not consistent. And then certainly in reality, what we see in the ground would back up what I just said. At least half of the banks have done a few Section 10s and 95s. That's great. But that's not really driving us towards home ownership, but at least it drives us towards, well, have you got some experience working with First Nations? And the same thing for policies around on-reserve lending generally. Only less than half less than half of the banks have actually got policies. So these are the things we're discovering in, talking to dozens and dozens of banks. So some common comments that we got and common themes that we received when we were talking to all these different banks. Again, lack of training and policies at FIs remains endemic, with the exception of a couple banks. Capacity development is therefore seen as a key focus. And I'm not talking about capacity development at the housing authority level or the First Nation level. I'm talking about at the bank. I'm talking about a person sitting in a branch, could be rural. They may have 3 or 4 First Nations around them. Do they know what the heck they're doing? Do they know how to accommodate that individual? Do they know what to do? So capacity, they don't generally, even at the bank I came from, even though we had great policies and stuff, there's a lot of turnover, maybe not a lot of volumes. So how can we help those lenders, do a better job by boosting their capacity? The other thing that we noticed was the bank focus was often elsewhere. So for instance, a lot of banks are more concerned about sponsorships and HR policies, and HR policy means hiring more Indigenous people at all different strata of the organization, from the entry-level jobs up to more senior people. And that's good. And that will eventually help solve the issue, because as more senior people who are Indigenous get into the organization, they can affect change from the inside. But that's going to take a while. We need to deal with problems today. So it's a dual prong approach, is deal with the HR, but you need to do the business side as well. And some banks were only doing one half of it, and focusing on those things. However, a good thing that came out of the comment, and one of the questions we asked all of the banks, would you be willing to work with us going forward? Would you be willing to have regular consultation, have an open mind? And the answer was universally yes. It was a resounding yes. So that I'm heartened by that. And as a banker, I can talk their language a little bit and hopefully get them a little more involved. The other things that came out of the discussions, and I'm talking common themes, a lot of them felt that the funds processes were too administrative. And you know what? They were in the early days. I remember it was brutal, a lot of paperwork, a lot of special forms that had to be used. And I know that under Travis, that is becoming a lot less administrative and easier to deal with. For instance, on the forms front, progress has been made to make it easier for the banks to get involved. There was also a lack of perceived value from the credit enhancement that Travis announced earlier or talked about earlier. At the end of the day, the credit enhancement is a guarantee on a guarantee, as Travis said. But if a bank is doing its job and evaluating people appropriately, looking at their ability to service the debt, their credit history, all that other stuff, do they have a bit of down payment? Do they have a plan? If you're doing your job as a banker, you shouldn't need a crutch. You should be able to do the loan based on that information you received. So credit enhancement's good. Is it always necessary? No, but it's important that it's there, especially for the banks with less experience. And also banks not generally seeing or understanding the value proposition. And when I say value proposition, it's not just about doing a housing loan. You need to understand that dealing with First Nations as a bank involves, you got to be good at housing, but you also have to understand how to do commercial lending, how to do infrastructure loans, how to help communities with their investments. So the value proposition is one basket of products, not one thing. So, and I think that's something we can bring to the table and talk to the banks about. So we then asked them, okay, guys, what do you see as an ideal solution for the First Nation Market Housing Fund to provide in the future? And again, sound like a broken record. When I agreed to sign up for the First Nation Market Housing Fund back in 2008, the thing that drove me to that was the career capacity development. To me, that was the most important thing. And what I'm saying here now, what we've heard is that we need to develop lender training. I just told you that. Assist with policy development, as was mentioned by a couple FIs. They told us they need help with that. And it was clear from the variable responses that a customized approach to differing lenders and regions is needed. And we also talked about aftercare. I remember, going out and spending maybe 3 or 4 or 5 visits to a community and talking to council, talking to housing, having, community meetings, getting the program signed up. Everybody's all excited. We do 2 or 3 mortgages. The bankers moved on to the next project, and you don't do enough follow-up. I was really impressed by a competitor. I'm not with the Bank of Montreal anymore, but a former competitor at a different bank, different color of blue, out in BC. And they actually had a dedicated policy in place in their region for regular follow-up. So we don't drop the ball. We keep going back and dealing with it and keep the program alive, as opposed to, you know, it withers and dies if you don't stay on top of things. So aftercare was a recurring theme, and I think that's something we have to focus in going forward. More clarity around the value of credit enhancement. I think progress has been made there. Travis and the team have done a great job of that. And the other thing is, we asked them about infrastructure, and it's interesting because a lot of the banks said, well, we wouldn't mind some help with infrastructure, like putting in roads and sewers and water lines and all that stuff that's needed before you can actually put the houses in. But we have to be careful how we tread here, because our mandate is to help get people in houses. You've got infrastructure solutions through banks, like my former bank has got a great infrastructure loan program. You got the FNFA. So we're going to talk about how can we play in the space, and is it appropriate? So we have more work to do in that area, but there's certainly a lot of interest in the fund looking at this. So we'll see how that goes down the road. But our main thrust is getting the banks involved right now and figuring out how we can get more of them playing in the space. Because let's face it, if you were not on reserve, you could go to any bank and get a mortgage. It's not fair to First Nations people that they can only go to a few. So we're trying to fix that problem. Oops. Oh, okay. I see how this works. I'm not all that technical sometimes. Anyway, so the new relationship with lenders, we're going to open the door for more lenders to work with the fund. And what has happened here is there used to be quite an application process for a bank to join up. That's gone. It's, if you're interested in participating and working with the fund, you can sign up. It's not a process anymore. Ongoing consultation with lenders. I just talked about that. We're going to continue to do that and fine tune what we do, and maybe even look at strategic changes. Here's something I also worked on for the last several months, and that's a pro forma housing policy. So I used to do that for a living. I wrote one. So we put together a pro forma policy and procedures manual that if a lender requires help, we can help them get started. It's got all the guts they need. Everything is in it, but now they have to put it into their format, their system, get their sign-offs, but at least they're starting with something rather than starting with nothing. Aftercare, I mentioned to you about that person from the other blue bank who gave us some great advice. We need to do more of that. We need to come up with a process that at least here's how you do it. And it's not even how to do it. Just make sure you diarize it, do the follow-up calls, make sure the program stays alive, answer questions. Turnover happens everywhere. It happens at the banks, it happens in housing authorities. So we need to do that to make sure these programs don't die out. Enhanced training. There's always going to be enhancements to the training that is already going on, provided by capacity building from the fund, but it's going to be enhanced and expanded, I would say, down the road. And provide increased and sustained visibility of the initiatives. That's what we're doing here today. We're talking about what we're doing. People need to know that the First Nation Market Housing Fund exists and what they're working on and how they're helping. And so there's going to be a more sustained visibility, perhaps via podcasts, our website, improving that. There's a lot of work that is going to be taking place over the next little while. And again, continuous effort to improve the relationship with the FIs. That's only going to happen by continuously connecting with them, talking to them, engaging and dealing with their issues. So the focus going forward, you've already heard some of this, and that is to assist lenders with the development of their own policies and procedures. The First Nation Market Housing Fund will be, as I just mentioned, providing help in that regard. And why is policy important? Why is policy at the bank level so bloody important? Because that person sitting in that chair in that small rural branch who doesn't know a thing, all of a sudden is getting permission to do the work. You can do it, and here's how you do it. Here's your policy, here's your procedures manual. We want you to do it because we've made all this effort. So Policy is important because it enables people to do the job. Without policy, everything's you're setting precedent every day. That's not a way to do business. So policy is very important, but it also leads to continuity. You know, if people leave, you lose that knowledge that they had experienced, but at least you've got that the continuity of policy and procedure that somebody can pick up and read. The other thing about policy development, and I'm just going to give you a bit of insight inside the banks. Policy development must be highly collaborative. You might have 15 people signing off on policy to make sure it's done right. I remember how painful it was getting policy done, but at the end of the day, we were so grateful to have it. And the fact that so many people were involved, it now has brought acceptance within the bank. So that's what's so important with policy and making sure it's done properly inside a bank because of all the collective effort that it takes. And then the other focus is on ongoing regular communication, which they said was both welcome and needed by the banks, between the banks and the fund. So some other items for contemplation after we had these meetings with all the FIs. And again, I'm sorry for being repetitive, and I'm going to keep saying it because if we don't focus on training the lenders, nothing's going to happen. So it became clear that capacity building must extend to not just the training an individual who wants to build or buy a home, or helping out people in a housing authority. We need to train the lenders. A centralized approach and fund-based approach to dealing with CMHC approvals may also be desirable by some lenders. In some cases, a First Nation would like to have an added layer of CMHC insurance on top of the fund guarantee, on top of the First Nation guarantee. It's a lot of work for the banks. And if we're trying to reduce impediments and make it easier for the banks to do this, we are looking at, can we do some of this work for them? I'm not sure we can yet, but we're certainly going to investigate it. That's all we can do at this point. And we're also going to consider adding support for infrastructure finance. One other thing that I want to talk about is risk sharing. You know, people think about the banks as great big groups of shareholders and people and faceless. And, to a degree, I understand where that's coming from. And it's always seems to be stacked in the bank's favor. But to be honest with you, when you're asking a First Nation to provide a guarantee to backstop a non-reserve housing loan program, the risk really rests with the First Nation. So one of the things I was working on before I left was getting those levels cut back. We started at 80%. We got one community down to 70. And then before I left, we got one down to 60. I believe that risk sharing is the way to go. The banks need to have some skin in the game, as do everybody. So by doing that and helping the banks understand the concept of risk sharing and the processes around it and baking that into policy is a really important thing going forward, not just for the communities, but everybody needs to understand their place. And First Nations should not have to bear all the risk. So that's something that we're looking at. And risk pricing as well. I mean, if you've got Travis and I talked about this yesterday. If you've got a community that's providing 100% guarantee, there's no risk. We should be providing better pricing at the banks. If, in fact, you have a partial guarantee, then maybe the pricing can be a little bit different. But these are all things that are part of negotiation and contemplation that we have to think about in a thoughtful way going forward. How many people here own a house? Quite a few. How many had fun with the bank trying to get a mortgage? Yeah, sounds good. Probably a lot of you paid for it yourself. Maybe got financing in a different way. But I want to think that in the future, people should be able to go into any bank and be able to get the same treatment that a non-native person would be able to get anywhere. That's the goal, and also to ensure that more and more people get into houses and in their own homes, and that's what we're trying to do. Anyway, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to turn it back over to Travis, who's going to talk a little bit about the future. So I'm going to hand it off to you here.
Actually, right now it'd probably be a good time just to open the floor up to some questions for Stephen because of this presentation. Are there any questions for Stephen? No? Okay.
I say it's a really neat program, and I also can't believe that you know, some of the things we're talking about, it's 2023.
Yeah.
We're talking about this right now, just talking about it, that's not a place.
Yeah.
It is mind blowing, like every First Nations goal is to bring members back to the community and provide housing, but right now it's really hard and heavy to provide it. There's not many opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really, really.
The other thing I forgot to mention and about home ownership, and not only does it solve the problem that you just alluded to, but it's also a good way to build wealth, right? And build equity. So, but to get there, you need to have a banking partner that's going to actually play ball with you as opposed to giving you the runaround. So,
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a mortgage through my First Nation, but as housing costs rise, it's, you know, offered it.
yeah. Oh, really?
And I have to have an unsecured line of credit off reserve,
Yeah.
which is killing me.
It's not enough. High rates. Yeah.
So it's yeah, really nice.
I'd probably also add, like, when we'll get to your question in a second, but I want to add to his presentation a little bit was when we met with the bankers, what I noticed over the last 20 years was how many in First Nation people are rising up in the banking systems. So we talked to a lot of Indigenous vice presidents. Those were the people we were interviewing. And so when you see more of those people rising up in the banks and also getting on the boards of directors of banks, then you're going to see some real changes and some opportunity, because those people have connections to the First Nation communities. They know what it's really like in a First Nation. So I think that it's hopeful that maybe some changes will come with all of these people in the banking system. You had a question in the back there?
They need a PCR from the council. But I said, no, I don't want that. I don't need a shadow. Just want to be on my own. But I was still denied.
So your comment was that you were denied for a loan from the bank. And what was the reason they denied you?
I was on a reserve.
You're on reserve.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's where the fund has a role to play, right? And this education of that branch manager, maybe he's not even realizing that in his bank they have policy to enable on reserve, or maybe they don't have policy, depending what lender you're working with.
Don't know which.
20 years ago.
Oh, 20 years ago.
Yeah. There was nothing. Nobody had programs back then, so it was all ad hoc, right? You'd probably get a little different. You'd probably get a little different response today, but back then it was like, I remember when I started 23 years ago, it was like there was nothing. It was horrible. So things have changed a lot. But thanks for raising that, because that's just an illustration of how kind of crummy it was back then. It's not great today either, but it's better than it was, you know?
But I think that that raises another interesting idea, is that First Nations have a lot of levers they can pull when negotiating with banks.
Yep.
So First Nation, they put all their deposit money in with a bank. So that bank is earning money off of holding those funds from the First Nation. They lend that out to make interest. And so how come they're not lending that to the First Nation? So the First Nation has these levers, like if the bank wants to finance the infrastructure of the community, putting in water lines and helping get buildings constructed. They want that business, they should be offering something like a on reserve mortgage program or better rates. So there's a lot of, I think as we become more educated, the First Nations have a lot more negotiating power than has been utilized in the past. So. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up this slide here, and then we'll wrap things up here. So for the fund in the future, we want more lenders and First Nations working with the fund. That's the direction we're heading. This project, we had 3 big research projects this year. The lenders project was one of them. But at future presentations, we'll talk about the other ones. We're going to have better products and services leading to more home ownership. That's what we're working towards. And we want to be the place, any First Nation in Canada, we want them to come to the fund to get the best information about home ownership. So that's the kind of organization we're building. And so we're moving away from that model that was created by the government to something that's driven by First Nations. Yeah. Are there any final questions?
How much personal, the person sitting behind the desk to give you the mortgage takes it personal that he or she decides that you would get it,
The loan?
the loan,
Yeah.
the mortgage?
That's a great question.
And the reason I'm asking the question is because I did go to a bank for a loan. And after they hum and hawed and looked at me behind the desk, they decided not to.
Yeah,
So I walked out the door kicking stones,
yeah,
not their brick walls. The stone I seen on the ground.
yeah,
I walked 1 block down the way to a bank that I didn't have any accounts or anything with and walked out with the mortgage.
Yeah.
So that same bank that denied me.
Yeah.
I moved all my everything over to the other bank.
Yeah.
And then they asked me why I was doing it.
Well, I think that's a perfect illustration of what I was just talking about. Some banks understand how to do it. Some banks have people that are trained and know what they're doing. Some people aren't afraid. But you went to a place that obviously they didn't know what they were doing. They weren't interested. They weren't trained. And it cost them a big relationship. You moved everything to the other bank. And so what we're trying to do here is how do we level that so that you're not getting, I mean, you're going to get, it doesn't matter. There's going to be companies that are going to annoy all of us for different reasons. But if we can have a little more consistency around how decisions are made so that you wouldn't have run into that, because that banker would have received the training they need and the incentive they need. And that's the other thing is incentive. Bankers and lenders have got targets, and their pay and their performance reviews and even their bonuses are based on doing business. So when someone turns down you and doesn't do that, that's hurting them in their business planning. So we don't know what was going on behind the scenes there, but I would suggest to you that it was a lack of training and a lack of interest by that organization that you were dealing with, because you were easily able to get what you needed just by walking down the street. Yeah. Exactly. They didn't even know you. Yeah.
I think that more personal than
Well, you know what? It can happen, but as I just said to you, there's nothing in it for them to turn you down. There's something in it for them to make it go. Is there going to be personal biases? And sure, yeah, sure they exist. I would hope that they're not as prevalent as they used to be. It used to be really bad. I remember when I started. Good Lord. But that's a great story, and I'm glad you shared it because it helps illustrate what we're talking about.
I think one of the advantages of a First Nation working with the fund in these arrangements is that one of the services we provide directly in communities is working with the individual members.
Yeah.
And we have people go in there at no cost to the First Nation to work with members to figure out, would I qualify for a mortgage loan at the bank? And if I don't, we tell you, and we also provide some counseling and help you address whatever is going to hold you
The
back
deficiencies,
and to hopefully qualify you in the immediate future.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Okay, well, Nyawa, and thank you very much for coming to our presentation. Nice turnout. I look forward to coming back next year, hopefully, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. On behalf of the organizing working group, we'd like to thank you guys for your presentation. Thank you very much.